Welcome to Positive Talk with Kevin McDonald. Hey, that's me. Hi, and welcome to Positive Talk. Our show features the best positive stories and people from around the globe as we endeavor to answer the universal question of why am I here and what is my purpose? Understanding that can change everything, and knowing your greatness is fundamental to living your best life. So join us right now as together we work to create the adventure of our lifetime. You know, I don't mind telling you that I really like that opening because it says a lot about all of us in the world that we're living in and what we should be endeavoring to do with our lives. And one of the people that has been so instrumental in helping me come to that conclusion, her name is Dana Parker, and she is right here with us right now. Dana, how are you?
Hi, Kevin. I'm doing so good. I love Fridays just because I get to be on the show.
I know we get to talk about some fascinating things and ideas and stuff like that. So I want to thank you for being part of my dream.
I love it.
And it's fun for us to hang out, and we get to talk to some of the most amazing people and authors. But I got to ask you, first of all, do you remember what it was like in the 60s?
Yeah, I was not here yet.
Well, where were you?
I wasn't born.
What do you mean? You weren't born in
the 60s?
Yeah,
I was born in the mid 80s, Kevin.
What?
Yeah.
I thought everybody was born in the 50s or 60s, and that's why there's this guy running around saying "Let's make America great again," because everybody wants to go back to the 60s. I that's what I thought anyway. I'm just kidding you. I know that you are not as vintage as some of us are.
Not as advanced yet. Yes.
But we have a guest. Her name is Donna Conrad, and she has written a book. And she's written a couple of books, and we talked a great deal about the first book, which is a kind of a memoir of what it was like in the 60s. And it kind of reads like a novel and just all the things that went on. But we're going to talk more about her second book and who she is, and how she became the writer that she is from being a little old English teacher, if I recall. So we're going to be talking with her for the hour. And Dana, it's you're not stuck, are you? Oh crap. Well, Donna, you seem to be okay, and Dana is had to check out and is going to check back in here in just a second. First of all, how are you today on this?
I am doing great. And how are you?
I'm awesome, thank you. It's a beautiful day. Well, no, it's not. It's cold, it's rainy, and it might even be snowing here, but who knows?
In just a little while, down the road from you two, down south, it's going to be snowing too.
Oh, wait a minute. I got a look. No, it's not snowing here yet, but
not yet.
Hopefully it's not going to. I talked with you the other day, and we did a show together. By the way, do you know, and when Dana gets back, I'll mention this again, but did you know that between my Independence Report, which I did first, and then Positive Talk Radio I did second, I want you to guess how many weeks you could be listening to Positive Talk 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. How many weeks do you think I'd put up there?
40.
40 weeks?
How about 10?
Wow, you've overdone me again. No, it's 7 weeks.
I'm sorry. 7 weeks. That's a lot.
Yeah, it's 100 and if there's 168 hours in a week, and so we've got 1,100 hours or something. So, and my point here is, if you want to go listen to Positive Talk and some of the great people that we've had on, including Donna Conrad, you can go do that for hours and hours and hours. And I encourage you to do that either through YouTube or from or on positivetalkradio.net. So in any event, Donna is here. She's got a couple of books out. The first book that I want to talk about is House of the Moon, It's almost like there was another song from the 60s called House of the Rising Sun. Do you remember that song?
Yeah, I do.
Funny story about that. Now, the House of the Rising Sun was written about a house of prostitution in New Orleans. And my brother, who was young at the time, and his friend decided that they wanted to do House of the Rising Sun at church. And so they, because they had no idea what the lyrics actually meant. But you know, fortunately they couldn't pull it off. But it was one of those things. Music was such an integral part of all of our lives back then. And you even said, there's a guy he's passed on now, but he's buried here in the local area, and he came from the local area. You know exactly who I'm talking about. And
The one and only Jimmy.
Jimi Hendrix, and you had a relationship. Well, and not a relationship, but you knew him because of your because of your family situation, which was really quite unique. Explain your family situation.
Well, my father was an undercover narcotics agent for the state of California. And my sister, who was 4 years older, had a boyfriend who dealt drugs to all the bands that came through Los Angeles. So it was a bit of a dichotomy for me to go. And of course, I went with my sister as opposed to my father. I was 14 and it was the 60s. So, yeah, she had access to a lot of the musicians. And so I got pulled in behind her as pretty young. Still, 14 was young in those days.
The last time we talked, I failed to ask you if you sensed the gravity of what it was like to meet people like Bob Dylan and Jimi Hendrix and Donovan and so many others from that time period. Did it strike you as being, this is really cool? Or was it like, here's a guy who can play a guitar and his name is Jimmy and he's a nice guy?
No, even at the time, especially with Jimi Hendrix, because I was at a concert and his music just completely blew my mind, to use the parlance of the time. And then when I ended up, because I was young and cute and that, thrown in the back of a limousine, which happened to young women at that time, and taken to a party, I was just completely out of my element. But his music always meant something to me, and I knew he was special. And in this section, when you read it, you realize how special he was, because he was kind and generous and considerate, and knew I didn't belong at that party.
Oh, that was yeah, that's really cool, because in those days, and I don't know how much it's changed, but in those days, a cute girl could get backstage pretty quickly, but sometimes you couldn't get out of being backstage, if you know what I mean.
Or out of the party when you're thrown in a limo, driven up into Laurel Canyon, up in the dark recesses of Laurel Canyon back in the 60s. You had no way home.
Unless they let you out, and they didn't generally do that for a while.
They generally didn't do that. So I was very fortunate that Jimi Hendrix was there.
Now, did it dawn on them that you were a 14-year-old child when you were getting thrown in the back of a limousine?
At the time, it seemed young to me, but I listened to an interview with Crosby. And he was saying, so the party I ended up at was at Mickey Dolenz house, one of the Monkees.
Really?
And
the
in an
last
interview,
monkey.
yeah, and Crosby said, "Oh yeah, we loved going over to his house because he always had little teeny boppers there, and nothing's as good as a 14 or 15-year-old." And that kind of blew my mind again. I read that as an adult, and I'm like, huh, okay, so I wasn't the only one that was major underage to be at those parties.
Well, and you were starstruck, and to be a 14-year-old girl and get thrown in the back of a limousine with some rock stars that you just saw on stage, and and stuff. And it's you can't blame a 14-year-old girl for doing that, because she has no, at that point in time, you had no idea what
No
potentially,
reference.
yeah, what could end up happening to you.
And on top of it, there were some mind-altering drugs involved. Speaking of Timothy Leary, as we did last time we talked.
Yes, well, and that's one of the things I can tell you. I have never taken LSD or any, acid or any of. What does it do? I said to this day, I still don't. I'm 60 something, and I still don't know what LSD does. What does it do?
For me at that time, it normalized my life. So my situation was so bizarre, and my father incredibly violent and kind of a paranoid schizophrenic, and the whole world was so divided that it rationalized and said, okay, this is normalcy for me. That's what it did for me. I think overall it, as the saying went, it expanded your mind, so you saw beyond the narrow confines of reality. And I think it was a precursor to my being an artist. And on my Facebook page, I have a quote from Nietzsche that says, no artist tolerates reality.
Oh.
So I think that kind of feeds back to the 60s.
Yes. And go ahead.
No, that's it.
And in looking at your book and looking through it and stuff, and living there in the 60s, there is a misperception, I think, about, and I think most people that lived in the 60s, which means if you lived in the 60s, you were actually born in the 50s to remember the decade of the 60s. And I think that there's a lot of misnomers about, the good old days and how wonderful it was. And there's even some guy, I don't know, I can't place who exactly it is, but this Make America Great Again thing, which which if you remember, women could not, like, open their own checking account, and they couldn't get a credit card, and in the 60s, and if they were they didn't make nearly the same amount of money. There was a racial issue going on. There were assassinations happening, and there was, oh, by the way, there was a war in Southeast Asia that many people came back from and were wounded, either mentally or physically or both. So it wasn't, when we're looking about, I love your opinion on that. When we look at the good old days, I think that there was some good things, but there also was a dark, seedy side.
Absolutely. And in why I wanted to write this book was to show what it was like to be alive and to be an ordinary person in the 60s. And the book is not a fun romp or anything. It shows the dark underbelly of the 60s. Everything that you just mentioned about women's rights, about civil rights, about just personal rights. When someone could come in and a young man is going to college and they rip him out and put him in a uniform and send him over as cannon fodder. And we fought against that totalitarianism. And it was a dark time. And the country was incredibly divided. And there was a lot of hate thrown back and forth. And I was a part of the peace movement. And I just retired from it when our side, the quote peace lovers, started getting violent. And I'm like, you can never fight violence with violence. And so the weathermen started coming up, other people, they started burning buildings and that, and I just backed off and said, okay, I will keep my own way of fighting peace, of I guess it would be nonviolence protest with Martin Luther King Jr. You just can't fight violence with violence. You can, but I don't find it effective.
It doesn't work. It doesn't work. But unfortunately, there is a price to be paid when you are nonviolent and the other side is allowing themselves to be violent. And it's
Mhm.
like it would be very interesting to have today's technology when Martin Luther King was crossing the bridge in Selma,
Mhm.
Alabama, I believe it was, and they were attacked and with dogs and beaten and all that kind of stuff as they were marching for peace.
Yes,
And that was that Selma? I think that was Selma.
I think it was. It was either Selma or Montgomery. No, I think it was Selma.
And
I'm bad.
yeah,
I should know that.
well, no, I mean, that was a long time ago, but so I think that we are living in a much better time today than we were back in the 60s because there's a lot more that's come to light. As an
Mhm.
example, nowadays, if a rock star were to take a 14-year-old girl and throw her in the back of a limousine, he would be ostracized from as being a pedophile.
I would
Um,
hope so.
you know, and so at least we are making some little bits of progress. But
I believe so. And now the police and the government are held more accountable than they were back in the 60s.
yeah,
And the
well,
whole 68 in Chicago, that was flat out a police riot.
yeah,
And the crowds were doing nothing they shouldn't have been doing other than being told, you disperse now. And it's like, why? We have a right to be here. So now I believe that in most cases, the police are held accountable. I think in individual cases, they still get away with murder. But by and large, the police forces are behaving in a reasonable manner, I feel.
yeah. I forgot about that. The Chicago riot at
Mm,
the Democratic National
National
Convention.
convention.
And the
Hmm.
people outside were protesting for and protesting against the war. And what's interesting about that whole thing is I listen to the news every night, and they were talking about the reason that we were in Vietnam was to prevent the march of communism from going around the world, and that it was important for us to take a stand somewhere, and that the Viet Cong and the Vietnamese and the North Vietnamese were very bad people. All of that turned out to be just nonsense. But we listened to it, and it was in the news, and that's what the powers that be were saying, and stuff. And then it comes out years later that none of that was really true, and that we lost 56 or 58,000 service members and
Hmm.
hundreds of thousands that were wounded both mentally and physically. And it
Let
was
alone what happened to the Vietnamese. They lost
millions of
10 times.
Vietnamese.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to me, it was an unjust war.
Well,
And we protested against the war, but also against conscription. And
yes,
as a generation, we did something that I still am very proud of. We ended the draft.
yes, we did. Yes, I was a
And
little
and
young, but I owe
mhm.
you a great thank you, because I came of age in 1975, and the war had just come to an end, and so did the draft. So I never even had to register for the dang thing.
ah, it took a tremendous amount of courage coming into the 60s to protest against the government and take a stand against the government, because we were all raised by parents who had either fought or supported World War II, had come out of the Depression, were very much, you do what you're told and you follow authority and you don't question it. And so we were up against our upbringing from the 50s, and our parents and the colleges, the universities were all You turn 18, they would come into the high school class and take everybody on their 18th birthday and take them in and sign them up for the draft.
Yep.
And you just did it. You did it. So to stand in public and burn your draft card, or to say I refuse to sign up for the draft, took a tremendous amount of courage in that environment. And it's something I don't feel is really recognized now. The courageous stand these men took to say, basically, I'm not going.
There was a gentleman who was ostracized in the 60s. His name was Muhammad Ali.
Yes.
And he refused to go to the draft. He refused to be inducted because and because he did that, he lost everything.
He lost the heavyweight championship. He lost everything. He was ostracized across the board. It didn't matter his talent. The fact that he said, I will not fight in an unjust war, was unheard of for somebody that big. For us in the trenches, it was a tremendous moment of validation that somebody that notable would stand up and say it.
It validated the entire process, I think, because he felt like, why should I go and kill somebody that I have no beef with? I have no reason to go do that. And yet you had at the same time, and this also was well hidden, I think if you remember, you had college people, mostly white, mostly affluent, who were able to get either a deferment or they had bone spurs in their feet.
I was going for bone spurs. Yes. Some notable political figures.
Yes, and they were able to not go, and there other people went in their stead, predominantly from small town America, poor America, people who did not have the resources to get deferments or to pay for college. And so they were drafted, and it wasn't a volunteer thing. It was if your draft number came up, you went. And so many of those men did not come back. So it was a very strange decade. And you're right in your book, which is called House of the Moon, Surviving the 60s. It is an amazing process that we went through in that decade. And losing Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy in a 6-week period in 1968 was horrific. You wouldn't even think about anything like that today.
It was devastating because both of them were such prominent figures for peace, for justice, for equality. And I tell you, 68 still, just thinking of the year, other positive things happened, but it still breaks my heart.
It
To
changed
think
America.
what we lost.
It changed America and changed the course of America because those two men had amazing followings. I'm sure that Robert Kennedy would have been president had he lived.
So do I. Yeah, I agree with you.
And had he lived, and he would have made changes to the country that would have been really in a positive way of getting out of, we would have gotten out of Vietnam, and he would have worked to make changes that would be positive, as would Martin Luther King if he'd lived.
I absolutely agree with you. And the loss of them, it seemed like for the young people that it was just a death knell for the cause of freedom, of civil rights, of peace. And what it did, it coalesced a group of people that had different beliefs and different aims, and said, okay, this is what the reactionary establishment is throwing at us. Now we have to be stronger. I still would have liked them both alive. It would have been better than coalescing. I think we would have come together, the various groups, if they had lived. But at that time, it gave us a focal point to say we cannot let hate and destruction and authoritarianism win. And so we kept going.
I remember those days well, and things like, and there are things that happened at that time that I think a lot of people have forgotten. I'm gonna bring up two words, and I'll bet you that you can tell me chapter and verse what happened that day. Kent State.
Hmm. Yeah, 30 seconds that killed more than 4 people. It killed our trust in the government in any way, shape, or form. The fact that National Guards would fire on a crowd, a peaceful protest, was unimaginable. It didn't happen in the United States. Our National Guard never turned against the people. Up to that point, it was uh, a shock, a rude awakening. And I think from that point on, a lot of the peace movement started saying, okay, we can't play fair with these people anymore. We're going to get violent also. And that's when I started backing off. But it was a shock to think that basically kids would be killing other kids because the National Guard's been involved. We're all young. The
Oh yeah.
college students were. And they killed people that were just innocent bystanders, just walking to class, and they opened fire. So yeah, it was a very rude awakening about the level to which the government was willing to go to stop us.
See, prior to that, there was make peace, not war, the flower power, the great music that came out of 66, 67, and 68, and all of the love and the flower people and all of that was that. But fundamentally, I think the Chicago and Kent
Mhm.
State changed the equation to where it became impossible to people didn't want to go to a peaceful protest and get shot at. And so that became an issue.
Well, and earlier than that, I was at a lot of at many protests at UCLA, at Berkeley, even in Palm Springs, if you can believe it. There was a rock concert, and we protested. And the police came in swinging batons. I mean, I got cracked across the head right here with a baton, and I wasn't doing anything but standing in the front row. Bad mistake. And saying no. I learned. Uh, but somebody stood there, and they were vicious and they were hateful. And I believe somebody can fact check this, but I think they were called the Black Hats that came up in Southern California. And I'm trying to remember what area, I think around Fullerton, UC Fullerton. And they were a group of police officers who were trained, what we would have now like SWAT command, but they were trained to face down riot situations, and they wore all black and they wore black hats. And when you went up against and they showed up, there was palpable fear that, okay, this is not going to go easy. They're not going to listen. They're just going to start swinging and arresting.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the undercoat of the 60s, and which was a difficult decade in a number of ways. And we actually, but on the positive side, we did get
Let's get to that.
we did get some civil rights done, and the Civil Rights Act was passed, and there were other things were beginning to happen, and that laid the foundation for the 70s and 80s and and beyond. And there were lots of people that were in that movement who ended up being stockbrokers and insurance salesmen and all that kind of stuff. But I think a lot of people can fundamentally wanted to, they felt like that change needed to happen, and and in their own way, they were trying to make it happen as they could. But most everybody, or did most everybody just kind of join the establishment, and after they grew up a little bit.
Well, I think kind of a general misconception is that everybody that was, between 15 and 25 was a part of this movement. But I'll take one example. We were always the minority. And at my high school out in Covina, California, out of a graduating class of 300, there were 4 of us that ever attended a protest.
Oh, wow.
There were 4 of us that were called freaks because we were hippies that did drugs and did this and went to movements, and the women in the out of the 4 burned their bras and said, no, we're not going to be subject to the patriarchy. But that was 4 out of 300 in one graduating class. So I think we were always the minority, but we got a lot of press.
Yeah, you did, especially places like Woodstock.
Yes.
Everybody came from all over the country for one of the best music festivals of all time. And the pictures that came out of that with, the freedom that people felt,
Yes.
to be able to do whatever they had in their heart to do. But did you ever notice that they focused on people who were not wearing clothes, which was their
Absolutely.
how they viewed.
Absolutely. Or very scanty clothes. And, let's take Woodstock, for example. There were 500,000 people there. How many people were in the United States at that time? And how many of them were under the age of 30? So it was still a minority. But to have that many people gather peacefully to help each other. And for people who don't know it, look up Wavy Gravy. He did the security there, and he set the entire mood. There were freak out tents if you got too much. Everybody was treated with love and kindness, and let's get through this together. Let's share what we have. And I give it up to Wavy Gravy for keeping that whole thing calm and loving. And I think his place was the Hog Farm. And they came up and they handled security, which was handled in a way we wanted to see national security handled, with kindness, with understanding.
So Woodstock was, now there was also this thing in California, this concert that the Rolling Stones did that didn't turn out well because of the
Didn't turn out well because of the Hells Angels.
yeah, exactly. But Woodstock was the ideal, and that really was the biggest part of the flower power movement and the make love not war and all of that. And they proved that they could get 500,000 people together and nobody got killed. There weren't any fights, maybe a few, but not many. And everybody had a really good time, even though it was raining and stuff, and they couldn't get out. Anyway, that was the ideal. That was what we were striving for.
Absolutely. It was the bright spot. To me, Woodstock was the shining star of the 60s, 70s, that whole generation. It was what we aspired to have the world be like.
Yes. And we learned that with the music that came out with the Beatles and Joni Mitchell and so many others, that was positive and loving and taking care of one another and being kind to one another. I think that was the beginning of what has become much bigger of a movement now than it was even then. Do you think?
Give me an example. Sorry, my mind kind of went, really?
Well,
okay. I'm willing to consider it.
What I mean by that is, in the 1960s, a show like Positive Talk really could not exist. there were other people, thought people, and folks that were interested in the betterment of mankind and the coming together of folks. Maybe it was because I was a little younger in the 60s, and I was, let's see, I was, when in 1970 or 69, I was 12. So I was taken with all of the Make Love Not War, with the Beatles doing All You Need Is Love for a international audience, and all of the music that was there. And I really, and I mentioned last time a song that I'm not sure that we can play it here, but it was called One Tin Soldier, and
Yes.
Coven was the group. And songs like that, Jim Croce had some wonderful songs that spoke to that. And Karen Carpenter did Bless the Beast and the Children, which was about, taking care of the kids and the animals and stuff like that. So there was a lot of positive things in that respect. And those are really the things that I remember. And tried to bring those things forward, to bring to more people to understand that we are in this together, that we are all one, and that we have the ability, if we get rid of the hate, division, and fear that so many of us have. I'm on my soapbox now, I'm sorry. Have so many have used for their life, or that's how they grew up. If we can get rid of the hate, division, and fear, and understand that we need to be kind, and we can be kind to everyone, regardless of their situation, regardless of their financial footing, or what color they are, or who they love. None of that should matter to any of us. We should be kind to each other. Do you agree with that? I mean, that's what I'm hoping for this decade.
Thank you for that reminder, because I still get kind of caught up in the divisiveness of the political and
Yes.
day-to-day life. So yes, there is a lot of positive interaction, allowing for the possibility of change. And your show is fantastic for bringing this into the world, and to say, let's talk about what we can do to make the world a better place. And I would say that I am involved with so many more people now that have the fundamental beliefs of equality and inclusion, and trying not to judge so quickly. And that I think there are more people now that I'm connected with that have that that basic value than even in the 60s. And we're more spread out. We have the ability through talk shows like this, through Zoom meetings, through all of this, to meet virtually and to give each other hope and to keep moving forward. To me, love always wins. It may take longer, but love wins.
I have a good friend. Her name is Kim Lingling, and she does something that is really kind of unique. She lives in a small town in Pennsylvania, and one of the things she does is she works with veterans, the local veteran association, and they send care boxes to people that are being deployed overseas, so
Mm,
that they can get their fix of beef jerky and Skittles and stuff like that.
mm,
And so they send out hundreds of these things a month. And but she also does something called a nugget of hope. She takes
mm,
these rocks that have been engraved with hope on them. They're black, shiny rocks, and
mm.
she'll carry several in her pocket. And this is what I think is happening all over the country that people aren't recognizing. She doesn't publicize this. But what she'll do is she'll walk up to somebody who appears to be having a bad day, and she'll walk up to them and say, "Here, I thought you could use this today." And she drops this
Ah,
little rock that says hope on it. She doesn't preach, she doesn't say anything. She just says, "Here, I thought you could use this today," and turns around and walks away.
that is
And
so beautiful.
isn't
I
that
love it.
something?
That is incredible.
And it's happening, I think, more and more, that people are taking the position that they're going to do something in their own way, whatever it is. It may not be big, may not be a radio show, even though she's got a podcast. It may not be, and she's an author, but it may not be a big thing. But if we can just be kind, if we can just go to the grocery store, and the checker that has been on her feet for 12 hours that day because they're short staffed and she's tired, and everybody's grumpy because the lines are long because they don't have enough checkers. And so you get up to the front of the line and everybody's like, and you say, I'm so sorry. I hope everything works out for you today. And by the way, I just want you to know you're doing a fabulous job.
Absolutely.
Would it hurt you? Would it hurt somebody to say that?
It doesn't. And to me, that's so important when I'm on hold for a long time on a queue for phone, customer service. After screaming at the automated teller, the automated queue, no, I want customer service. Once the customer service gets on the line, I always am, how's your day going? And they're like, oh, pretty good. How about you? And they're shocked. And it's like, these are people that are trying to help other people. Yes, it's their job, but that's what they're doing. So be kind. Just, and it doesn't hurt to do that. In fact, I always feel better when I get off the phone and I have made somebody else laugh and feel good about their day.
That is so important. That is so important. I interviewed a gentleman just the other day. His name is Nash Fung. He is a magician and a keynote speaker. So it's kind of cool. He mixes his magic with being a positive motivational keynote speaker. And you know what else he does? He works for the crisis hotline 4 hours a week and answers phone calls for people. He doesn't get paid for this. He does it on a volunteer basis because he wants to give back. And we can all do something, even if it's just to say hello to somebody who may not have been talked to in all day or in a couple of days. And so there's so much that we can do that isn't grandiose and doesn't require us to really step out, just to be kind, just to be a nice person, for heaven's sakes. Can't we do that? Or do we have to yell at each other all the time?
I would hope that we can do that. And like when I go out of grocery stores and somebody is there, with a sign, anything will help. I always buy them something to eat in the store. And if they have a pet, I buy like a pet treat for them. And I walk out and I give them food and I give their pet, usually a doggy biscuit. And the smile on their faces is all the payment or gratitude you need. That's wonderful. To feed somebody, give somebody some nourishment. And I think food goes a lot further than just money. You hang a dollar bill out the window, as opposed to say, what do you think this person would want to eat?
I have a quick story for you. I
Okay.
believe in the fact that the universe, God, whoever you want to call it, I believe that he sends me messages through music. And all the time I'll be thinking about something and I'll turn on the radio when I get into the car, and a song that will be directly related to what I'm thinking about will be playing. I don't know if that happens to you. You're nodding your head. I assume it does.
Absolutely. I love it.
So I was in the Safeway parking lot, and lady walks up to me and says, "Sir, I'm embarrassed to do this, but I don't have any money. And do you have $1 or $2 that I can have so that I can buy a loaf of bread?" And I looked so I pulled out my wallet, and by the time you pull out your wallet, you're kind of committed. So I opened up my wallet and I had 3 $20 bills. And so rather than say, "Oh, sorry, wrong denomination, I can't give you," I said, "Oh, what the heck?" And I gave her a $20 bill. And she looked at me like I had just given her the biggest Christmas present. And she said, "Now I can get cheese and we can have grilled cheese sandwiches. Oh, thank you so much." And so I got in my car, and there was a song, and I forget the name of the band that did it. I should remember this because it's an important part of the story. But I turned on the radio and it said, and the song was "Give a Little Bit." Give a little
Oh,
bit. You know that song?
I do. I don't know who did it.
I've forgotten as well. But so that was my validation
Mhm.
that is exactly what I should be doing. Now, could she have taken that and bought cheese and a couple of cheap beers? Not my place to say. I gave her that as a free and clear, and she could do with it as she will. But it was important, and if we
Mm.
do that from time to time, doesn't have to be all the time, but if you do, just be nice, like you do with if somebody is outside the grocery store and begging, you can. Oh,
Super trap.
that's it. That's it. Give a little bit by Supertramp. Thank you, Nathan. I is Mr. Researcher extraordinaire. So those
Fantastic. It is my mom. What you were saying, it doesn't matter what they do with the money. My mom, who was Irish and pretty abused in her marriage, but was always like a glowing spirit. And she raised us to say, no harm, no sin. Just be kind, be good to people. And she also said, you're only responsible for your actions, your intentions. And if somebody takes it wrong or doesn't do what you think they should do with it, that's not your problem. You will live and die with your intentions and your actions. And that's all you need to worry about.
She was a wise woman.
She's a very wise woman.
And I'm sorry, has she passed now?
Yes, back in 96.
Oh,
Died young, smoking, don't smoke. Small cell lung cancer. Mom, dad, and older sister all dead from it.
oh, my brother and my father died of lung cancer as well.
Yeah,
And
all heavy smokers. So, yeah, not good. Just that was an aside. Public service announcement. Get a nicotine patch. Stop it.
well, and the reality is that we want people that are kind and loving to be here for as long as we can, as long as you can be of service.
Absolutely. Make the
Um,
world a better place.
and that's all you can do. So, and
Mhm,
if we all work together for this, and I'll give you a
mhm,
great example. At the beginning of the show, I told you that we've got about 1,100 hours of this type of programming up between Positive Talk
amazing.
Radio and My Independence Report and YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and all that stuff. And if you really want to do something for other people, invite them to listen to some of these shows, and just so that they can get a sense that it's not all dark and gloom and crap and all the stuff that's out there right now, because there are other people, and I've interviewed over 2,000 of them, who are interested, like you are interested in the betterment of mankind. Speaking of which, we've got to get this in because you've got a book coming out in April, and I want to talk about it. April 9th, 2024, the last Magdalene, or how do you say that?
Well, I say Magdalene. Who knows?
Okay.
Potato, potato. I'm thinking it would be Magdalene.
That's
That's what I'm going with.
exactly. But you're the author of that. It is a historical novel that involves Mary Magdalene and the Christ and the times that they were living in at that time, and also women's rights and what was
Mhm.
happening. I think it's a fascinating project that you're working on. There are going to be 3 books, right?
4.
Oh, 4. One, we birthed another one, did we?
Woohoo! Yeah, 3 after this one that will come out. But yeah, it follows her life, and yeah, as somebody else mentioned, the connection between House of the Moon and the Last Magdalene goes deeper than just women who are marginalized and talking about women's rights. It's people who stood up for themselves and said, "This we're not going to go along with the status quo. We're not going to behave ourselves because you're trying to impose upon us a hateful, destructive, um, divisive, situation. And for Judea in the first century, that was Rome. Roman occupation was brutal.
Hmm.
And where we got arrested and beat up in the 60s, they were killed. They were nailed to a tree. Crucifixion was for any non-Roman citizen that was convicted or accused of insurrection, meaning, I don't like the way Rome's doing things. You're dead,
Hmm.
was the only response. And so to stand up against that type of tyranny was exceptional. And that Miriam, as she would have been called there, and Yeshua, who was Jesus and Mary, stood up against that and stood up against the inequality and the exclusiveness that not only Rome embraced, but the priesthood. And in those days, Jerusalem was the temple, it was the seat of Hebraic power. And the high priests were put in there by Roman prefects, and they were chief collaborators with Rome. So, of course, they were going to do Rome's bidding. And so it came down from not only the religious authority, but the occupiers, the political authority, and to stand up and say, no, we want freedom, we want love, we want inclusion, we want equality. Those were all things that Rome could not comprehend and would not accept or condone. So that's the book is set in this time of oppression, of tyranny, and what these people's lives were like and what they had to do to fight it, and their courage and determination to stand up for themselves and for the other people that lived with them.
The interesting thing about the life of Jesus was that when he was growing up in Nazareth, he witnessed crucifixions. That was not an uncommon thing. Yet he had the intestinal fortitude and the bravery and the courage to understand that what he was saying was in conflict with what Roman law was teaching. And
Mhm.
therefore, he was risking his life and knew that he would end up being crucified. Now, I know you've studied the art of crucifixion, for lack of a,
Unfortunately, yes.
and it was as brutal as they come. It was that's why they called it crucifixion. It was brutal.
And it was meant that the soldiers who crucified somebody were trained to keep them alive as long as possible. And the nails didn't go through the palm. They went through right here between the the
On the
the
wrist.
yeah, on the wrist, but between any blood vessels, between not I mean any veins, any arteries, so that you stayed alive. And it was the hands, the bone in the wrist that held people up. And
Well,
it was to lose the least amount of blood possible.
and the other thing is that because ultimately crucifixion was you would suffocate.
Yes.
But what they would do was, if depending upon the angle that they put your legs, would determine how easy it was for you to raise up a little bit so you can get a breath. And so the art was to put your legs at the right angle so that you would have the longest, most
Hmm.
drawn out death. And some of them last 2 or 3 days.
Absolutely. And then if they, well, this is getting really dark again. Uh, if they would pass out from exhaustion, they would take sponges soaked in vinegar and put it under the nose to revive them, like smelling salts. Okay, you're back.
Well, fortunately, we don't do that to each other anymore. Think about that.
Yeah.
Isn't that positive? I,
We have other ways of people being crucified.
yeah,
More metaphorically, that
yeah.
we kind of ruin people
Well, you've heard that
in
said.
other ways, but not like that.
Yeah, now they say he was crucified in the media. Well,
Yes, well, Yes.
That's all that
He lived. If you were crucified, you didn't.
I've enjoyed this hour immensely. We've been talking with Donna Conrad, and thank you so much. But before we go, we've got we got just about 30 seconds. So give me your information real quick.
Okay, website, donnaconrad.com. And if you sign up, you'll get the first chapter of The Last Magdalene. And there are also the lost chapters of House of the Moon, the ones that didn't make it in the book. And also you'll be entered in a drawing to get a signed hardback copy and be able to know where I'm going to be speaking next and any workshops I'm going to be teaching at writers' conferences.
Donna Conrad, thank you so much for being here. And by the way, everybody, be kind to one another because each other's all we've got. And we'll see you later.